Welcome back to Life in Review. I'm Josefa Salinas, your host. Well, when classes resume, COVID-19 is probably still going to be around, and Californians will continue to rely on their local schools for safety and support. The California Department of Public Health and the California Department of Education has recently issued reports on school reopening. Their guidance overlooks some of the challenges faced by local school districts. Well, there's so many parents that are so worried. They just don't know, is my child going to be safe when they go back? It's definitely an uncertain road. It's something none of us have ever faced before. And the California School Board Association just released a report called The Uncertain Road Ahead, Reopening Schools in the Time of COVID. And I tell you, it is just so incredible, the pressure that kids are under, that parents are under, as we undertake this whole thought of going back to school. Troy Flint is the Chief Information Officer for the California School Board Association. Good morning, Troy. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
So, first of all, tell me what the California School Board Association is so that people kind of have an idea of what your authority is.
So the California School Boards Association represents almost every school district and county office of education in the state of California. That's over 1,000 local education agencies that educate about 99.8% of students in the state.
Okay, so you're kind of all-encompassing then.
Absolutely. So our role is to advocate for anything that strengthens public schools and supports student outcomes. We provide legislative advocacy in terms of pushing for legislation that will benefit public schools and opposing legislation that would be harmful to public schools. We provide training and professional development for school boards. We do substantial research on issues related to public schools. And then we also provide services to members at pooled or discounted rates that reduce the cost of doing business for school districts.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with some questions from the audience for you that hopefully we can address, and then we'll get to the report. One mother says, "Hi, Josefa. I can't tell you how nervous I am about my child going back to school. I saw in a bulletin that kids will have to wear a mask throughout the school time and no activity for the kids that involve interaction with one another. So that leaves me with the impression that kids would be bound to their seats for the entire school hours. How will that impact children with disability? And how will they address children with disabilities? My 7-year-old has ADHD, and no way will he be able to stay in a seat for an extended period of time, and that's setting him up for failure." How are we going to address that one, Troy?
So these are some of the same questions that school leaders, education leaders, school boards are grappling with right now. Really, the foremost concern and what we're telling our members is that health and safety has to guide everything that you're doing, all the decisions that you're making on behalf of students, and that equity needs to be 1A. The two most important concerns are health and safety, and how are we going to treat students equitably. The reality right now is that although there is very ambitious guidance from the state, and we appreciate the thoroughness with which the California Department of Public Health and the California Department of Education has developed this guidance, where it falls a bit short is that the real world application. One, in that schools do not necessarily have the capacity, the resources, or the amount of investment, the money needed to apply some of these rather idealistic scenarios. And so local schools or school districts are going to have to make a decision based on their specific circumstances. What do their facilities look like? What do their staffing levels look like? What is the capacity of their staff to do contact, to do tracing, to do testing, do they have the ability to hire new staff because you have to reduce class sizes to avoid students being in proximity to each other? Do they have to purchase new buses or hire more bus drivers because you're running more routes because you can't put as many children in the bus? A lot of districts are looking at some sort of hybrid model which combines the distance learning that people have become familiar with on-campus instruction. For instance, some sort of cohort scheduling or staggered schedules where you have students attending class 2 days a week, and then the other half of the student body attends a different 2 days, and then on the fifth day, Friday, all of the students participate in distance learning, which has its own problems because a good number of students don't have access to broadband internet at home or to computer devices. So there are really no easy answers, and specific to the piece of the question about students with disabilities, this has been a major concern throughout because many students, I believe the caller mentioned that her child has ADHD, and distance learning without regular interaction, having a kid sit in front of a computer, has been very challenging up to this point, and that won't change in the new school year. And then, of course, the restrictions on movement are also a problem for many students. So I think that for many people, distance learning will be an option, but it's not available for everyone. And that's why there's some disappointment that the state hasn't provided more resources. Right now, the legislature is going through a very difficult budget process, but we're urging people like your caller who have specific concerns, or anyone who cares about public schools, to urge the legislature and the governor to come together on a budget that provides schools with additional resources that are needed to meet the moment, to use one of the governor's favorite phrases, and to allow us to serve all students regardless of need in this unprecedented time.
The next question is, are they going to take assessment and inventory of unused school buildings that can be used as extra campuses? And if extra school buildings are available, are they going to be hiring extra teaching staff? And then this mom says, honestly, I don't believe it's the right time for school to return.
Again, one of the frustrating parts of this whole process is that there is no mandate which has been issued by the state to clarify exactly what must be done by local districts and to ensure that people in different regions of the state or even within the same county are on the same page. So that is part of the process that local districts will have to navigate in concert with community, staff, and parents. With specific respect to the question about facilities, is there a statewide inventory? No, there's not an inventory being done with regard to excess space to accommodate new configurations that are needed for social distancing. But that's the type of work that each local school district will be doing in preparation for whatever return to school plan they eventually develop. And that's the same with respect to staffing. Not many California school districts are in a position to hire significant new staff. California school districts were significantly underfunded before the pandemic. Prior to COVID-19, we did a survey in February 2020, which found that over 70% of California school districts were deficit spending, and over 30% of California school districts were contemplating layoffs. And that was pre-COVID. Since the pandemic hit, schools have incurred significant additional costs. One district, which I believe is local to you, Los Angeles, a unified school district, was putting those costs at about $400 per student. And now when you look at preparing for the return to school in full force, the costs are significantly more expensive. There are two national associations which represent school superintendents and what we call school business officials, essentially the CFO type at school districts. And they did a study which said that for the average district, and the average district for them is under 4,000 students and only 8 schools, so that's not a very big school district. But for that average district with slightly under 4,000 students, they're estimating additional expenses for the 2021 school year of $1.8 million. So if you look at a school district like Los Angeles, I think you're talking more on the order of $330 million in additional expenses to implement some of these safety-related, health-related requirements that are being put forth. So there's just not the money available for those type of expenditures. And yes, If we were in an ideal world, we would certainly be hiring staff in volume, buying more buses, acquiring all this equipment, doing the extra sanitation. And we are encouraging districts to do all that they can to meet safety needs, but the resources aren't there, and the state needs to be realistic. Right now, schools are being set up for failure because the state is putting out these guidelines that create a set of expectations among parents, but then not providing schools any of the resources needed to meet those guidelines or the expectations that the state has created. So that is very unfair to districts, and it's unfair to parents and students. And different areas will approach it differently, but the commonality here is that schools are being hung out to dry.
Jeez, that's not very comforting. And that leads me right to the next person who emailed me and said, Josefa, please ask this. With the recent numbers coming in after the protest, there's a large spike in the virus. This data supports the stay-at-home orders. Is it more difficult to keep children distant from one another in a situation like this? How are you going to accomplish it, especially since the beginning stages show no symptoms? Now, there have been some reports that say it's very difficult for kids under 15 to transmit it to one another. Then there's other reports that say, it transmits the same with everyone. So there's conflicting reports, but one thing we know for sure, when kids get back together, it's going to be hard to keep them apart. So what are we going to do?
So one little quibble I would offer is that the data from the protest is not reflected in the numbers yet. It's too soon for that. What you're seeing with regard to the spike or the rise in cases is probably related to the loosening of the stay-at-home orders, and particularly the large gatherings you saw around Memorial Day weekend. It's possible that the protests will increase that spike even further, but that data is not in the numbers yet. That's a little bit of an epidemiological quibble. But with regard to the question about social distancing, yes, this is a big concern that students have, that staff have, and that school boards have, which is that even if we had the resources from the state to implement these social guidelines, which schools certainly don't, the reality of the way that kids interact, particularly at the elementary level, but even up through high school, is going to make enforcement very difficult. And then what do you do when students are in violation or it's difficult to maintain these rather idealistic standards? That's why some districts, not the majority, but some districts are looking at going to a full distance learning model throughout 2021. Again, that has problems, as I said earlier, because not every home, and in fact, a disappointingly large number of homes in California lack the equipment, whether that's computer devices or the infrastructure, broadband access to participate fully in distance learning. But some districts have opted for that full-time distance learning model. Most of the districts that we surveyed, more than 70%, are opting for a hybrid model where only certain parts of the student body attend schools on certain days. That will allow for more of the spacing and social distancing that your caller was talking about.
Okay, the last one we have here. Will the decisions made affect all school districts at the same statewide, or will they merely be guidelines with each district making its own decisions on how to move forward?
What has been put forward by the California Department of Health and the California Department of Education, those documents are guidelines. There is no mandate. If the state were to issue a mandate per California's laws, then the state would have to pay for the expenses related to the mandate, and they're not going to do that. They've been pretty clear about that. And also, if the state were to issue a mandate, then essentially they would be taking on responsibility for whatever would result from that mandate, and I don't think that they want that blame. So they have put the heavy burden on local school districts to work in concert with their county departments of public health, as well as their staff, their students, and their parents, to find a situation that works for them based on their demographics, based on their financial situation, based on their logistical capacity, and based on their local standards. So you will see a significant degree of variance among school districts across the state and even within the same county.
So I have a question for you with regard to the lottery, because they always say, oh, buy a lottery ticket. It's, all the money goes towards, education in schools in California. It seems like there's millions spent every week on lottery tickets. Is that actually really being reflected in our schools?
Not at all. This question will induce much sighing, eye rolling, and gnashing of teeth from anyone in the education community. I hope people understand far and wide that the total proceeds from the California lottery are about 1% of education expenditures in this state for K-12 schools. The lottery is a minor, insignificant portion of total revenue that has no overall impact on the resources that schools are able to provide or the quality of education in the state. The impact is minimal.
Wow. And here we all thought all these millions and millions and millions, it's got to be helping the schools.
No, much of that money has been siphoned off for other purposes based on some changes in the law that the legislature made subsequent to the initial passage of the law that directed some of those proceeds to schools.
Wow. Now that's a conversation that needs to be had, and people need to understand that and see how we can, first of all, find out what those changes were and get that money redirected back to schools where we all thought it was going.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Okay, so let's get back to this conversation of getting back to school. Kids are going nuts. I know some 12-year-olds and even a 4-year-old who's in a preschool can't wait to get back. They just want to play with their friends. They want to see their friends. Oh, I can't wait to hug my friends. So how are we going to talk to kids? And what are some of the things parents should be saying when when the kids go back to school?
So I think it's very important for school districts to communicate what steps that they're taking so that parents understand where the district's priorities are, the measures that they have put in place to safeguard the health of students and community, and so that the parent can make an informed decision based on their family values and what they think is best for their child. Each parent has an obligation to inform themselves, but the school districts equally have an obligation to engage community about what they want to see and to make sure that they understand what steps have been taken to reduce so that no one feels that they were misled or that they put their student in a situation where they are uncomfortable.
I know some of the colleges have talked about starting school earlier. I believe USC is going back August 17th, and so that they can end the semester earlier, because there's this in the future is that the virus will come back in the flu season, the height of it being December, January. So they're saying, oh, well, let's start earlier so that we can finish earlier and kind of miss that vulnerable time in December when the flu tends to be the biggest. Is this true, and will we see this in our K-12 schools?
I think there's some logic there, but it works better at the post-secondary, the collegiate and university level than it does at the K-12 level, because one of the major concerns that the universities have, particularly a global university like USC, is that you have students traveling from all over the world, coming there in late summer, and then they go back home for Thanksgiving break, come back to school, then they go back home for Christmas break, winter break, and then come back in January. All that travel, people dispersing to different parts of the globe and then coming back to campus and then repeating that process basically twice within 6 weeks is a major risk for infection.
Right.
That exists at the K-12 level, but not to the same extent because most people are traveling a relatively short distance to school. Some districts may opt for schedule modifications like that, but I don't think a dramatic change like what USC did, or I believe Notre Dame made the same change, I don't think that will be widespread at the K-12 level.
What are some things that parents can do to get their kids ready? And do you think that it's going to be universal that all kids are going to have to wear masks And will the teachers have to wear them too? And the bus drivers and the security and the principals? Will everybody be masked up when they go back?
So that's what the guidance recommends. Again, we have concerns about, one, will we receive the personal protective equipment, the masks, the sanitation stations, the gloves in enough time and in the sufficient volume to apply appropriately? That's a big outstanding question. And then, of course, you have the question of, will people implement with fidelity? Will they follow those rules? But certainly that's what the guidance suggests. So each district is going to have to determine how rigid they are going to be in implementing that guidance, if they even have the resources to do so.
And I would think that's going to put a strain on families as well. I mean, right now, you're not worried about giving your kid a new mask every couple of days, especially if it's like a washable one, or gloves, or, things like that, because they're at home. But if they go back to school, and that's something that has to be, number one, do all the kids have a mask in the house? And number two, how often does it need to be washed? All those kinds of guidelines that parents might not have ever thought about. What are we going to do in a situation like that? What if the kids don't have a mask? Are they going to be giving them one when they get to school?
So yes, you have to budget for that. Earlier, I talked about the estimate for the average expenses that each district will incur related to COVID costs in this upcoming school year. We put that figure at $1.8 million for a school of 4,000 students. And included within that estimate is the cost for disposable masks for an estimated 30% of students who would not bring a mask on a daily basis.
Yeah, and kids are known for losing things. I mean, how many times I know my parents out there are shaking their heads. Your kid comes home, you're like, "Where's your backpack?" "I don't know. I set it down and I can't find it." "Where's your sweater? Where's your sweatshirt, that you went to school with?" "I don't know. I set it down on the playground and now I can't find it." Kids are known for losing things, so the possibility is endless. I went to the bathrooms or I got a drink of water and took my mask off and I don't remember where I set it down. So there's so many complications when we're thinking about going back with this. What do you see as some of the biggest problems that we could be facing right away when schools head back?
The biggest concern is whether schools will be able to implement social distancing in a meaningful way and in a way that allows for a robust education and a rewarding social experience for kids while they're at school. And then when you get into the logistical process of it, whether schools will have personal protective equipment and sanitation devices in a timely manner and in sufficient volume to be able to keep the promise of providing a safe and healthy learning environment for students, staff, and community.
Troy, is there somewhere that people can go and see this report called The Uncertain Road Ahead, Reopening Schools in the Time of COVID?
Sure. You can go to csba.org/coronavirus. Again, we're the California School Boards Association, and the URL is csba.org/coronavirus. And actually, if you can't remember that longer URL, if you just go to csba.org, there's a huge banner at the top of the page that will direct you to our special webpage devoted to coronavirus resources. And while you're there, I encourage you to download our toolkit where you can find templates for sending an email or for a script for calling your legislator to tell them to prioritize the health and safety of our children and provide schools with sufficient funds to allow for a safe and effective reopening of schools.
Well, it's a shame that we even have to call them and tell them this. You think that would be a priority for them. But parents, I encourage you to go to csba.org, download those templates, fill them out, and send them to the person responsible in your area for governing what's over your school. Send them to the school board. Send them everywhere. Let them know that we expect and will participate in making sure that our schools are safe for our kids, safe for the teachers when they go back. And parents, a lot of it's going to come on you too. You're going to have to participate. You're going to have to be willing to volunteer, get in there and help make this all happen. but the tools have to be in place for the schools to be able to give the basics to teachers and to students. Troy, thank you so much for being with us today, and the California School Board Association for putting this report together. And please, as things progress, come back and see us, talk with us, let us know what's going on. We've got a very active audience. They're willing to get in there and fight for something, and we're definitely here to support you.
Anytime, happy to come back. We love to spread the word.
Thanks so much for being with us today. I'm Josefa Salinas. Until we get together again, stay strong, stay focused, and most of all, stay informed. I'll see you next time right here. Have a prosperous, amazing week. Most of all, be good to you and take good care of your families.